Welcome to the Chamber Files. Every story you are about to hear is real, sent to us by real people who lived through something they cannot explain. If something happened to you, something you have never told anyone, send us your story. Your experience could be featured right here. This is the Chamber Files. And these are the stories that were never supposed to be told. Story 1. The one who should have stayed home. I want to tell you something that I still think about to this day. And the reason it sticks with me so much is not because it was some movie-style horror situation. It is because it was real life. It involved people I trusted, and it proved to me that you can look someone dead in the eye and have absolutely no idea what is going on behind those eyes. This was a few years back. My girlfriend at the time, I will call her Mara, and I were going through one of those rough stretches that comes with just trying to be a functioning adult. Bills, work, stress, all of it piling on at once. Mara suggested we rent a cabin for a few days, somewhere deep in the woods, just to reset. I was completely on board. The only problem was money. We did not have a lot of it. That is when she came up with a second idea. My closest friend, a guy I have known since middle school, I will call him Derek, was dating someone at the time. Mara figured if we invited them along to split the cost, it would turn into a fun couple's getaway, and we would actually be able to afford it. I called Derek that same day, and he was excited before I even finished explaining. We found a cabin that had everything we were looking for. Deep in the woods, a stone fireplace, the whole setup. Booked it for the end of the month. Then, less than a week before the trip, Derek's girlfriend ended things. It came out of nowhere, and by all accounts, it did not end well. Mara and I immediately felt terrible. We talked about whether we should just refund his half and let him off the hook entirely. We genuinely could not afford the full rental ourselves, but it also felt wrong to make him pay for a trip he was no longer going on. When I brought it up with Derek, he told me not to worry about it. He said to keep the money, go enjoy ourselves, and that he would be fine. I pushed back a few times, but he insisted. So Mara and I started getting pumped again. A couple's trip. Just the two of us. Cozy cabin in the winter woods. Then the very next day, Derek texted me and said he had found someone to take his ex's spot on the trip. I told him I was not sure about that. Mara agreed with me when I told her. We did not know anything about this woman. Travel with a stranger is awkward enough. But travel with someone's rebound, someone he had apparently known for all of 1 week, that felt like a recipe for disaster. Derek begged. He told us she was chill, that we would love her, that it would not be weird. And then he sweetened the deal by offering to cover my entire portion of the trip. That offer probably swayed me more than it should have. We said yes. We regretted it within about 20 minutes of being in the car together. Derek introduced his new girlfriend as Claire. She was quiet, not the shy kind of quiet, where you can tell the person just needs to warm up. More like a quiet that felt deliberate, like she was observing everyone around her. Mara and I tried to draw her out during the 2-hour drive. We asked about her job, where she grew up, what kind of music she liked. We got short answers or just a small smile. By the time we pulled up to the cabin, I honestly could not have told you what her voice sounded like. The first night started okay. We got settled, the fire was going, and we were all sitting around just unwinding. Mara suggested Uno. She always suggests Uno. It is her thing. Everyone agreed, and for a little while it actually felt like things might loosen up. Claire even seemed to relax a little. She was laughing at a couple of plays, starting to seem more human. Then, Mara called Uno, meaning she had 1 card left and everything shifted. Claire's face changed. The calm just vanished. Her voice, which had been so flat and quiet the entire trip, suddenly had real heat in it. She started accusing Mara of cheating. We laughed at first because it seemed like she must be joking around. But she was not. She got louder. She kept insisting there was no way Mara could have gotten down to 1 card without cheating, as if Uno has some kind of mathematical barrier to winning. Mara tried to defend herself, and that made it worse. Claire was practically screaming at someone she had met 6 hours earlier over a card game. She swiped all her cards off the table and walked out of the room. Derek apologized. Mara and I just looked at each other. We let it go. Dinner that night, Claire was completely fine. Normal. Smiling. She acted like the Uno incident had never happened, which was almost more unsettling than if she had still been upset. And then, the second thing happened. While we were eating, Claire started talking about her and Derek's personal life in a way that was deeply inappropriate for people who had just met. Private things. The kind of things you simply do not share at a dinner table with near strangers. Derek looked like he wanted to disappear. I kept cracking jokes and steering the conversation away, and eventually it stopped. But the mood was off. The four of us did not do much after dinner. Later that night, Mara shook me awake and told me to be quiet and listen. Through the walls of the cabin, coming from the other end of the hallway, we could hear two voices. The tone made it obvious. Derek and Claire were fighting. We decided to pretend we had not heard anything. We were not going to make Derek feel any worse than he already did. The next day passed without much incident. Derek was quiet and withdrawn. Claire kept mostly to herself. Mara and I filled the silence and tried to enjoy the cabin. That second night is when everything changed. I woke up sometime around 2 in the morning because there was someone standing in our room, right next to the bed. I jolted upright, and it took a second for my eyes to adjust before I realized it was Derek. He looked genuinely frightened in a way I had never seen from him before. Not dramatic scared, just quietly, deeply shaken. He asked if he could stay in our room. He asked if I would lock the door. I told him to sit down and explain. He said he had woken up in the middle of the night, and Claire was standing at the foot of the bed, completely still, just staring at him. When he asked what she was doing, she said she was watching him sleep. Just in case. He asked just in case of what. She did not answer. She turned around and walked out of the room. He waited a few minutes, then decided to get up and check on her. Before he left the room, he pulled back the blanket on her side of the bed. There was a knife there. A large kitchen knife, just sitting in the sheets. He left the room quietly and came through the dark living room toward us. He said Claire was in there. She was humming to herself, moving around slowly, almost swaying. He said it looked like sleepwalking, but felt different, felt intentional. He tried to get past her to reach our room, but the floor creaked under his foot, and she stopped. She turned toward him and said, in a calm, flat voice, "I see you." Then she turned back around and kept moving. He got into our room and locked the door. Mara was awake by now. The three of us sat there in the dark and just listened. We could still hear movement in the cabin, that low humming drifting down the hall. Then we heard the front door open and close. Derek went to the window and looked out. Claire was walking toward the tree line. T-shirt and shorts in the middle of winter. No jacket, no shoes. Just walking into the dark woods. He ran back to the bedroom and told us the knife was gone. Mara immediately said we needed to go get her. Whatever was happening, we could not let someone walk into freezing woods alone at night. Derek did not want to move. He was scared, and I did not blame him. Mara was already getting dressed. While we were standing there trying to decide, the front door opened again. We heard footsteps coming back down the hall. Slow, even steps. Still humming. She went back to the bedroom. We stayed in ours until 6 in the morning. When we finally came out, Claire was in the kitchen doing dishes. She turned around, smiled, and said good morning like it was the most normal thing in the world. Mara went to help her. I pulled Derek aside. He was pale. A few minutes later, he texted me to come to the bedroom immediately and not to say anything. When I got there, he was holding the edge of Claire's bag. He had bumped it while packing, and something had slid out. The same knife. It was tucked into the side pocket of her bag, ready to travel. We left the cabin within the hour. The drive home was long and quiet. Derek cut off contact with Claire as soon as we got back. She never tried to reach him. Not once. Mara spent a long time after that trying to find Claire online. No social media. No records anywhere. She even checked public inmate databases. Nothing. It is like the woman simply did not exist. which tells you everything you need to know. Whatever name she gave us was not real. And if the name was not real, then the question I still do not have an answer to is what exactly she was planning to do on that trip. I guess the only thing I know for sure is that for some reason, she decided not to do it. Story 2. The man at the door knew my name. There was a period in my life where I became deeply uncomfortable around other people. Not a passing phase. This was a full withdrawal that lasted about 2 years. My anxiety around social situations had gotten to a point where I would go out of my way, and I mean significantly out of my way, just to be completely alone. One of the things I started doing during this time was renting secluded cabins on weekends when I had the money for it. I would drive a couple hours out of the city, find somewhere with no neighbors, and just exist there. Hiking, reading, silence. It sounds extreme, I know. But when every casual interaction in your daily life feels like a drain, you will understand the appeal. This particular weekend was in the colder months. I found a place about 2 hours from home, arrived on a Friday evening, made a simple dinner, read for a while by the fire, and turned in early. A completely unremarkable start, exactly what I was there for. Saturday morning, I went out for a long hike. The trail wound through thick forest, and I had it entirely to myself, which was the point. About halfway through, something shifted. I started hearing sounds behind me. Branches snapping, the crunch of leaves, the kind of sounds that could easily be an animal, or the wind, or just the natural settling of a forest. But the rhythm of it felt deliberate, like it was following my pace. Every time I stopped walking and turned around, there was nothing there. Just trees. I would stand still for a moment, hear nothing, start walking again, and within 30 seconds the sounds would return. I told myself I was being irrational. I probably was. But the feeling would not leave, and eventually I just did not want to be out there anymore. I turned around and went back to the cabin earlier than planned. That evening was harder than usual. Something about the hike had left me unsettled, and when the anxiety gets hold of me, it tends to spiral. I had a couple of drinks to take the edge off, put on some music, started to feel more like myself. By around 10, I was in a decent enough headspace, just sitting there with the music on, not thinking about much. That is when I heard it. A knock at the front door. It was not a loud knock. It was careful, measured. I turned off the music and stood there, trying to decide if I had imagined it. Then it came again. The front door had 2 small rectangular windows set into the upper panel. I walked over and looked through them. The porch and the driveway were dark. Nothing there. I stepped back, and the knock came a third time. I looked again. This time, there was someone standing there. He was hard to make out in the dark, so I reached over and flipped the porch light on. And what I saw made even less sense than a stranger at my door at 11 at night in the middle of the woods. The man standing on my porch was dressed in a suit. Clean cut, sharp haircut, athletic build, clean shaven. He looked like he was heading to a business meeting. He did not look like someone who had been wandering through the woods. I kept the door locked and called through it, asking if he was okay and what he needed. There was a pause before he answered. A strange pause, longer than it should have been, like he was processing the question rather than just responding to it. Then he said he had been in a car with his girlfriend earlier, and something had happened. He said he had been walking through the woods for hours trying to find her, and now he was lost. He asked if he could please come inside to use a phone. On the surface, that was a story that made some kind of sense. But the delivery was all wrong. This man did not sound distressed. He did not sound tired, or scared, or relieved to have found a door to knock on. His voice was completely flat in a way that was hard to describe, like someone reading words from a card, rather than actually living them. There was no emotion in it at all. I told him to step back to the end of the driveway, and I would call someone for help. He paused again. Then he said he really needed to come inside, that something was outside, and if he did not get inside, he was going to be in trouble. I told him I was calling the police, and that he could either wait outside or leave, but the door was not opening. I turned away from the door to grab my phone, and, That is when I heard his voice again, lower this time, almost like he was speaking directly into the wood of the door. He said he needed to hide. He said he needed to get inside and hide. He said it twice. Then the knocking changed. He started pounding on the door, hard and fast, the whole frame shaking with it. I ran back and yelled at him to stop. I said I had already called the police. I said things I am not proud of, just to fill the silence. And then he laughed. It was the first fully human thing he had done since showing up on that porch. A real laugh, almost amused. I looked through the window, and his face was right there, pressed against the glass, inches from mine. I stumbled backward. When I steadied myself and looked again, he was just watching me with an expression I still cannot explain. Not exactly threatening, just not right. And then he said, "Come on, just open the door already." And he used my name. He said my actual name. I do not know how to describe what happens to your body in that moment when a stranger in the woods says your name through a locked door at 11 at night. I stood completely still for a few seconds. Then I picked up my phone and called 911. I told them exactly where I was and exactly what was happening. When I looked back at the door, the porch was empty. The officer arrived about 15 minutes later. I had not moved from where I was standing. I told him everything. He seemed genuinely confused. He said it was a quiet area, said he had not gotten any other calls that night, said he had never received a report like this before. He was kind. He could tell I was shaken, and he did not make me feel like I was imagining things. He suggested I drive into town and get a hotel room. I told him I had been drinking and did not feel safe driving. He offered to drive me himself. On the way to my car to grab my bag, the officer stopped walking. He made a sound like something had caught him off guard. I turned, and he was pointing at my tires. All 4 of them had been slashed. Someone had done it quietly, either while I was inside or while I was distracted at the door, or maybe both. The officer called it in, kept his voice steady, got me into the patrol car, and drove me to a hotel in town. He stayed with me in the lobby until I got hold of someone I trusted. I never went back to that area. I have thought about that night hundreds of times since. The suit, the flat voice, the pause before every answer, the laugh, the name. I have no explanation, and I never got one. What I do know is that someone slashed my tires. Someone was out in those woods while I was hiking, and those sounds I heard were not my imagination. And whoever that man was, he knew my name before I ever opened that door. Which means he knew me before he got there. Story 3. Someone had been living in the attic for over a year. About 6 months ago, my father died. I want to be upfront that this is not a grief story in the traditional sense. My father and I had a complicated relationship. He was not a cruel man. He just was not the kind of father I needed growing up, and I think somewhere inside he knew that, even if we never talked about it directly. We loved each other from a distance, with good intentions, but without ever quite getting there. When the estate was settled, I found out he had left me his cabin. He owned a small place in the woods a few hours from the city. I had been there as a kid a handful of times and had not thought about it in years. My friends immediately said it was his version of a final joke. But I do not think that was it. I think he knew I would sell it, and he wanted me to. He was trying to leave me something useful. The catch was that to sell it properly, I needed to go out, clean it up, fix anything that needed work, and make it presentable. So I decided to go. I told myself it was practical. But honestly, some part of me wanted one last look at a place where my father had spent so much of his time. My version of saying goodbye. I drove out on a Thursday evening, and the first thing I noticed when I walked through the door was the smell. It hit me immediately. Thick and sour and wrong. Not rotting food exactly. Something more like mildew and sweat, and something organic that had been sitting far too long in an enclosed space. My father had not been to the cabin in close to a year before he passed, so I assumed it had just gotten damp and stale. I did a quick walkthrough looking for dead animals or a broken pipe. Nothing obvious. The second thing I noticed was that the cabin looked exactly how I remembered it from when I was 10 years old. Same furniture, same shelves, Same layout. It was like stepping into a photograph. My father was not someone who replaced things. I spent several hours doing a thorough clean of the downstairs. Wiped everything down, took out bags of trash, got the place smelling at least livable. I had a checklist, and I worked through it methodically. While I was cleaning, I kept hearing sounds above me. A faint shifting, like weight moving across a surface. I told myself it was the rafters settling, or an animal that had gotten in through a vent. I knew the cabin had a sort of hybrid space above the back hallway. Not quite an attic, not quite a crawl space. Something in between. There was a pull cord in the ceiling back there that released a folding ladder. I figured I would deal with whatever was up there in the morning. I made something to eat, read for a while, and went to bed in my father's old room. I fell asleep thinking about him, about this place, about all the weekends he spent out here alone that I never thought to ask him about. I woke up around 2 in the morning to the sound of movement. It was coming from directly above my head, not the subtle creak of a settling house, actual movement, something shifting weight, something repositioning itself. My first thought was raccoons or squirrels, but the sounds had too much deliberateness to them, too much consistency. I decided I was not going to get back to sleep anyway, so I got up, grabbed my phone for the flashlight, and walked down the back hallway toward the pull cord. The attic door was already open. The ladder was hanging down. I was certain I had not opened it when I arrived. I had walked past that hallway a dozen times during cleaning, and I would have noticed a ladder hanging from the ceiling. I told myself maybe the latch was old and had given way on its own. I stood there with my flashlight and told myself that. Then I noticed something on the floor at the base of the ladder. A snack wrapper. A fresh one. Not a dusty old thing from years ago. The crinkle of it was still clean. I picked it up and stood there holding it for a long moment. Then I threw it away, got a glass of water, and went and sat on the couch in the living room. I turned on the small lamp on the end table beside the couch. It gave off a low amber glow, just enough to keep me out of total darkness. I sat there and thought about my father. I thought about the wrapper. I tried to make it mean something simple. Then I looked across the room toward the corner beside the old recliner. There was a lump on the floor near the base of the chair, covered by a blanket. I had cleaned this entire room that afternoon. I had moved the furniture. I did not remember leaving a blanket there, let alone whatever was underneath it. I stood up slowly and took a few steps toward it. Then, I stopped. At the edge of the blanket, poking out from underneath the hem, there was a boot. I took one step back, and then the blanket moved. Not slipping, not settling. It moved the way something moves when the thing underneath it changes position. I could see it now that I was looking. The rise and fall of breathing. There was a person under that blanket, a full-grown adult, lying on the floor of my father's living room, 3 feet from where I had been sitting. I backed into the kitchen without making a sound. I grabbed my phone and my keys off the counter. And then I walked as fast as I could to the front door and got out of that cabin. I ran to my car and reversed down the long driveway without turning on the headlights until I hit the main road. In my rearview mirror, I saw the front door open. A man came out onto the porch and stood there, watching my car pull away. He was gaunt and unkempt, with the look of someone who had been living rough for a very long time. He did not chase after me. He just stood there. I called the local police department and reported what had happened. They arrived within 20 minutes. By then, he was gone. The officer who handled the call told me that based on the condition of the attic, the amount of trash up there, the arrangement of old blankets and belongings, this man had almost certainly been living in that space for over a year. He had probably moved in sometime after my father stopped visiting regularly. When nobody came to the cabin for months at a stretch, he had no reason to leave. They never identified him. He was gone before anyone could find him, and as far as I know, they never located him after that either. I never took another step inside that cabin. I hired a company to clear everything out and sold the property as is a few weeks later. The officer said the man was probably not dangerous, that if he had wanted to do something, he had had countless opportunities while I was sleeping just below him. That is supposed to be reassuring. And in a rational sense, maybe it is. But I think about the night I fell asleep in that cabin thinking about my father. And I think about how directly overhead, just a few feet above me, there was a stranger lying in the dark, listening to me move around in the rooms below. For more than a year, he had been up there. He knew the sounds of that cabin better than I did. He had been living in it while my father was dying, while the paperwork was being sorted, while I was driving out there to say goodbye. That is not something I have been able to make peace with. I am not sure I ever will.